Sergeant Jack Halden leaned back in his chair, staring at the endless expanse of stars through the viewing window in his quarters aboard the Serenity. The intergalactic peace vessel, a marvel of human engineering, was more a prison than anything else for Jack. He'd been stationed here for months, far from Earth, carrying out the quiet, tedious work of maintaining peace treaties and ensuring the ship stayed functional. The constant hum of the engines, the sterile white walls, and the cold steel floors were his only companions. He had little to do besides routines, the occasional drill, and some perfunctory interaction with alien diplomats. Life was slow. Life was quiet. Life was lonely. He sighed, tapping a pen against the edge of his desk, the sound echoing in the stillness of the room. One of the few things that kept him sane were the books scattered across the floor. Old Earth classics, mostly. Paperbacks with dog-eared pages, their spines cracked from being read too many times. Anything to break the monotony. His quarters were small, functional, and distinctly human. The walls were adorned with posters from long-forgotten movies, a few family photos crammed into makeshift frames, and a few trinkets he'd picked up from his travels through various star systems. There was a sort of charm to it, chaos in the midst of a ship that ran on immaculate order, a human touch, so to speak. Tonight, like most nights, Jack had settled in for some time with his latest book. He wasn't expecting much of anything, just the usual quiet routine. It was late, well past the usual curfew for any diplomatic meetings or missions, and he was about to pour himself another cup of stale, synth-brewed coffee when the door to his quarters slid open. He barely registered the movement at first. The ship's AI was constantly running checks, and doors were always sliding open and closed for one reason or another. Maybe a malfunction. But then he heard something. Footsteps. They were soft, almost dainty, and they didn't sound like the heavy strides of another soldier. Jack frowned, standing up quickly and taking a few cautious steps toward the door. His mind immediately jumped to the worst case. A stowaway, maybe, or worse. A diplomatic envoy who had decided to show up unannounced. "Who's there?" he called, his voice thick with the remnants of sleep. No answer. And then the figure stepped into the room. Jack's breath hitched. Standing in the doorway was, well, it wasn't anything Jack had expected. He had, in his wildest dreams, never imagined he would meet an alien like this. She was tall, slender, her skin a shimmering shade of blue that seemed to glow faintly under the room's lighting. Her hair was long and golden, cascading in soft waves down her back. But it was her ears that stood out the most, long, elegant, and pointed, sweeping back like an intricate piece of artwork. She wore an armored suit, though it was sleek and not overly cumbersome, like the military gear Jack was used to. For a second, Jack just blinked at her. There was a moment of complete silence. Like time itself had stopped. He had no idea how to respond. Was she a diplomat? A member of an alien race? One of those Luran delegates? His mind raced through possible explanations, none of which were even remotely plausible. The woman, for her part, didn't seem all that concerned. She had a slight grin on her face, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well," she said, with a thick accent that sounded almost melodic, "this isn't exactly what I intended." Jack's jaw nearly hit the floor. What?" he managed, still trying to process what was happening. "Your room, I seem to have wandered into it by mistake," she continued, stepping further inside with a casualness that Jack found entirely baffling. She looked around, eyeing the mess of books and clutter scattered across the floor. "I didn't expect the human quarters to be so disorganized." Jack blinked a few more times. What? How did you?" "I'm Zara," she cut in, a playful glint in her eyes. "And you are?" "Jack," he said, still trying to make sense of the situation. "And this is my room. You're, not supposed to be here." Zara nodded as though she understood. "Ah, yes, I deduced as much. I was supposed to meet with someone else. One of your diplomats, I think. But I took a wrong turn and here I am." Jack stared at her, unsure whether to laugh, scream, or just pretend this was some weird dream he'd had after too much synthabrew. But something in her calm demeanor, her casual confidence, was disarming. He could feel the edges of his anxiety begin to soften. "Well, you've certainly made yourself at home," Jack said dryly, gesturing to the clutter around him. "This is not what I imagined my first meeting with an alien would be like." Jara raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "What did you imagine then? A grand reception? A parade?" "I mean, yeah, kind of," Jack said, his lips curling into a smile despite himself. "Maybe not a parade, but definitely not this." She laughed softly, the sound like a bell. "I can see how this might be confusing, but no harm done, right? I'll just leave now." But as she turned toward the door, Jack found himself speaking before he could stop himself. "Wait, no, stay. I mean, I don't know why I said that. It's just, I don't get it. You're an alien, on a human ship, and you just waltz into my room? Shouldn't there be some protocol?" Jara looked over her shoulder, her smile widening. "I'm not exactly here for diplomatic reasons, Jack. Just exploring, you know? We Lurans like to understand things firsthand." "So you just stumbled into my quarters?" Jack asked, trying to stifle a laugh. Jara's grin grew mischievous. "Seems like it. You humans have a saying, don't you? Accidents are the best way to make new discoveries?" Jack shook his head, laughing. "I guess that's one way to put it." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them. Jara stood near the door, still looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, and Jack found himself oddly at ease. She wasn't threatening. In fact, she was interesting. His first real encounter with an alien species, and it came with awkward humor and charm. "All right," Jack said, shaking his head. "So now what? You're lost, I'm guessing, but you've decided to stay and chat?" Jara shrugged. "Why not? It's not every day I get invited into a human's quarters." "Well, I didn't exactly invite you in," Jack pointed out. Jara waved her hand dismissively. "Details, besides, you seem interesting. I want to know more." And so the conversation began, not as a diplomatic meeting, not as a carefully planned interaction, but as an accidental encounter that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. As they began to talk, Jack couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. And in this case, it had decided that the first human-alien interaction aboard the Serenity would begin with a mistake, and a lot of awkward laughter. The following days aboard the Serenity had an odd rhythm to them for Jack Halden. The usual routine of drills, briefings, and the occasional communication with the alien ambassadors had taken on a different tone. The more Jack tried to settle into his solitary existence aboard the ship, the more Jara seemed to appear, as if the universe had decided that the two of them were somehow, inexplicably, meant to interact. And strangely enough, Jack found himself looking forward to it. Jara, for her part, seemed to enjoy her unexpected foray into human culture. It was as if her curiosity had taken over, and now she was a permanent fixture in Jack's once predictable life. It started innocently enough. A knock on his door in the middle of his evening shift, a random comment during a passing conversation. Slowly but surely, the awkwardness from their first meeting was replaced with something else, a shared connection, one born from their mutual bewilderment at the other's world. One evening, after a long day of monotony, Jack sat at his desk, flipping through an old Earth book. His mind was half on the pages and half on the dull hum of the ship's systems when a soft knock on the door broke his concentration. He looked up, expecting the usual quick check-in from a fellow officer, but was instead greeted by Jara's amused face poking around the doorframe. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice light and teasing, "but I thought you might be in need of some company." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're becoming a regular around here. Should I start charging you rent?" Jara grinned. "If I had the currency for it, I would. But unfortunately, I'm not exactly rolling in intergalactic credits." "Shame," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "I'd make you pay in coffee, but I don't think even the most advanced species would consider it a valid currency." Jara stepped fully into the room, her tall frame filling the doorway. Her golden hair gleamed even in the dim light, and her long, elegant ears gave her an otherworldly air. She was wearing a simple form of armor, nothing too extravagant, but it was sleek and stylish, a stark contrast to Jack's utilitarian military fatigues. "So, what are you reading today?" she asked, her eyes scanning the book strewn across his desk. "Just a little light reading," Jack replied dryly, holding up the book he had been flipping through. A classic Earth novel about a guy who accidentally becomes the hero of a war. Not exactly highbrow stuff. Jara's eyes gleamed with interest. "I must admit, your species has a peculiar fascination with accidents." Jack chuckled, setting the book aside. "You could say we're a little prone to them. So what's on your mind? I'm guessing you didn't come by just to critique my choice in literature." "I'm fascinated by human unpredictability," Jara said with a slight grin. "Your species seems to thrive on chaos." "That's, one way to put it," Jack said, standing and moving toward the small counter that passed for a kitchen in his quarters. He began preparing a cup of coffee, mostly out of habit. "I guess we do enjoy a bit of disorder. Keeps life interesting." Jara leaned against the doorframe, watching him with curiosity. "It's strange, though. Where we come from, order is everything. Our world runs on predictability. There's a place for everything, a time for everything." Jack snorted as he set the coffee machine to brew. "That sounds exhausting." Jara tilted her head, her long ears shifting slightly. "I suppose it is, but at least it makes things easier to understand. You humans, on the other hand, embrace the chaos. You find meaning in it. It's perplexing." Jack raised an eyebrow, handing her the mug of coffee once it was ready. "You make us sound like some kind of puzzle." "Maybe you are," she said with a smile. "But it's a fascinating puzzle." The conversation meandered as it always did when they were together, light-hearted, filled with humor and curiosity about the other species. Jara found herself laughing more than she had in years, and Jack, despite his initial unease, had begun to enjoy her company. There was something about her perspective, her willingness to question everything, that made their conversations feel fresh and exciting. As they talked about human culture, about the messiness of Earth, about humor and emotions, Jack began to realize just how much he had missed human interaction. The simple jokes, the familiar banter, the way people could connect without needing to think too hard about it. It was something Jara seemed to grasp, despite her alien origins. "So, tell me," Jara said suddenly, leaning forward with a playful glint in her eyes, "what exactly does a human soldier do when he's not soldiering?" Jack leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "Well, I suppose we spend a lot of time staring out at space, contemplating the void." "Ah," Jara said, nodding sagely, "the eternal mystery of the stars. Or are you contemplating your coffee?" Jack couldn't help but laugh. "Both, I guess. It's a pretty profound experience, considering how bad it is." "Should I be offended by that?" Jara asked, her tone mock serious. Jack grinned. "Only if you're planning to serve me better coffee next time." They both laughed, and for a moment it felt like time had slowed down. The ship, the mission, the distant political tensions, it all faded away. It was just the two of them, sharing a quiet moment in the vastness of space. It was absurd. It was unexpected. And somehow it was exactly what they both needed. As the evening wore on, Jara and Jack continued to trade stories about their respective worlds, about what it meant to be human and alien. She told him about Loran, about the towering cities, the crystal forests, and the harmony that pervaded their existence. She spoke of their constant quest for knowledge, how every individual was expected to contribute to the greater good of their species. There was no room for the chaos Jack had described, no space for individuality in the way humans embraced it. "It's not better or worse," Jara explained, her tone reflective. "Just different." Jack nodded, sipping his coffee. "I get it. Humans are chaotic, messy, but we make it work." "And you're more than just messy," Jara said with a smile. "You're unpredictable. That's the real beauty of it. You never know what's going to happen next." Jack chuckled. "Yeah, that's us. But hey, we make it fun." The conversation drifted toward more serious topics, but the tone remained light. They discussed the delicate balance of politics, of how their species, despite their differences, shared more common ground than either of them had realized. The laughter, the jokes, the easy banter, it was a stark contrast to the political discussions Jara had been a part of for so long. And it was starting to feel like their connection, however improbable, was growing stronger with each passing day. By the time Jara stood to leave, the room felt different. It wasn't just a space for one anymore. It was shared in a way that Jack couldn't explain. They had crossed a threshold, one that neither of them had intended, but both of them had embraced. As she reached the door, Jara turned back to him with a wink. "Next time I'll bring better coffee." "I promise," Jack smiled. "I'll hold you to that." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind an air of possibility, of something more than just a chance encounter. In the vast expanse of space, amid the quiet hum of the Serenity, Jack couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. They had started as strangers, and now somehow they were something more. A month had passed since Jara first stumbled into Jack's quarters, and the unexpected encounter had gradually evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. The Serenity still hummed quietly in space, its mission unchanged. But for Jack Halden, life aboard the ship had become anything but routine. The stark isolation he had once embraced now felt distant and almost unnecessary, replaced by the unpredictability of his interactions with Jara. What had started as an awkward mistake had blossomed into a friendship that neither of them could ignore. They were still two beings from different worlds, one human, the other alien. But their conversations had grown deeper, more thoughtful. Jack found himself looking forward to her visits, whether they were filled with lighthearted banter or philosophical debates about their vastly different cultures. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and though neither had openly acknowledged it, the undercurrent of something more was there. But even amidst the laughter and camaraderie, there were moments when reality knocked on their door, bringing the weight of their positions into sharp focus. Jara, despite her casual demeanor, was a diplomat, sent to help foster peace between human and alien factions. Jack was a soldier, bound by duty, but more than anything, he was still a human, with all the flaws and emotions that came with it. The growing tension between the human governments and various alien factions hadn't gone unnoticed aboard the Serenity. Rumors of war had spread like wildfire, and with each passing day, the political atmosphere on the ship grew heavier. Jara had confided in Jack during their late-night talks about the unrest back on her homeworld. It was clear that the fragile peace they had all worked so hard to maintain was unraveling, and fast. Yet Jack couldn't help but feel that the quiet, shared moments with Jara were the only respite from the chaos. They were not the center of the storm, they were an unexpected island in its midst. One evening, as Jack sat at his desk, reviewing the latest intelligence reports, Jara walked in, her usual easy smile replaced by an unfamiliar solemnity. Her usual spark was dimmed, and Jack immediately noticed. "Jara," he asked, putting down the tablet he'd been reading. "What's going on?" "I've been called back," she said quietly, her gaze meeting his. "The council has decided that my assignment here is over. They've reassessed the situation." Jack's heart sank, and for a moment it felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "Wait, what do you mean, called back? You're leaving?" Jara nodded. "The peace talks have taken a turn. Tensions are escalating, and I'm needed back on Luran. My presence here is no longer beneficial to the mission." Jack stood, his mind racing. "This is ridiculous. You can't just go. We've only started making progress. We've barely scratched the surface, Jara." The words came out more forcefully than he intended, but he couldn't help it. The thought of losing her, of this unexpected bond they had built, was too much. Jara reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm, her touch calming despite the weight of her words. "Jack, you know I have no choice in this. It's my duty. You understand that, don't you?" "I understand," he said, his voice low, "but that doesn't make it any easier." She smiled faintly, her blue skin reflecting the soft light of his quarters. "You'll be fine. You're stronger than you think, Jack, and you've got this ship full of people to keep you company." Jack snorted softly, though the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, great company. Jack snorted softly, though the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, great company. Except they're all busy trying to keep their heads down. Zara's gaze softened. You've been more than just a soldier to me, Jack. More than an ally. You've shown me a side of humanity that I never thought I'd see. One full of humor, warmth, and unpredictability. I'll carry that with me, no matter where I go. Jack's throat tightened. And I'll carry you with me, he said quietly. But that's not going to make saying goodbye any easier. She laughed softly, the sound bittersweet. No, it never does. As they stood there in the silence that followed, Jack realized how much she had changed him. The rigidity of his life aboard the ship, his distant, almost mechanical existence, had been replaced by something richer, by the warmth of connection, the spark of something that transcended species, ranks, and duties. Zara had unknowingly opened a door that Jack hadn't even known was there, a door to vulnerability, to shared understanding, into an unspoken sense of belonging. But duty was duty, and Jack knew that it was something they both had to face. The next morning, Jack accompanied Zara to the docking bay, where a sleek, alien shuttle was waiting to take her back to her world. The crew around them bustled with their usual tasks, indifferent to the fact that one of their most unexpected visitors was about to leave. Zara turned to Jack just before she boarded the shuttle, her eyes searching his face. You'll be okay, Jack, she said, her voice firm despite the lingering sadness. You've already done more than you know. You're not alone, even when it feels like it. He nodded, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. And you'll be all right, too. Just don't forget to laugh every once in a while. Zara smiled, her long ears twitching slightly in amusement. I'll remember. I promise. With one last lingering glance, she turned and stepped into the shuttle. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss, and the ship lifted off, leaving Jack standing there alone in the bay. The sound of the shuttle's engines grew fainter as it disappeared into the vastness of space. The silence that followed was deafening, but Jack didn't mind. He stood there for a while longer, watching the stars beyond, lost in his thoughts. He had come a long way since that first chaotic encounter with Zara. He wasn't the same man who had locked himself away in his quarters, isolated from everyone and everything. He was a man who had learned to embrace the unpredictability of life, to find meaning in the chaos, and to connect with others, even when it seemed impossible. As the days went by, Jack found himself more engaged with the crew, more open to the world around him. He realized that the lessons Zara had taught him weren't just about aliens or peace treaties. They were about humanity itself, and that perhaps was the greatest gift of all. Though he would never see Zara again, he knew that her presence had changed him. The unexpected encounter that had begun with a mistake had sparked something in Jack, a new understanding of himself and the world, and for that he would always be grateful. The Serenity continued its mission through the stars, and Jack Halden continued his own, no longer alone in the vastness of space. He had learned that even in the cold expanse of the universe, connections could form, unexpected, unlikely, and always profound. And in the end, maybe that was the most important thing. By the time the Navcom screamed its final desperate warning, I was already spiraling through the upper atmosphere of an uncharted Class F planet, like a flaming cocktail of poor decisions and dying hydraulics. My ship, the Tetherhawk, shuddered like a terrified goat in a thunderstorm, and the interior lights flickered with all the steadiness of my last relationship. Autopilot disengaged, the onboard AI chirped with the cheerfulness of someone announcing a surprise party for a man falling out of an elevator shaft. Yeah, no kidding, I grunted, yanking the control yoke just in time to avoid plowing directly into a jagged cliff face. I didn't recognize the star system. I hadn't intended to be here. One badly timed detour through a wormhole to shave 3 hours off a cargo run and bam! Welcome to the middle of nowhere, with 2 moons, fluorescent grass, and an atmospheric composition that probably hated my lungs. I crashed spectacularly, of course. The rear thrusters gave out completely, and I skidded across the landscape like a metal hog on ice. When I finally stopped, upside down, and with half my seatbelt jammed into places it was never meant to go, I counted my limbs, coughed dramatically, and made my first decision of the day. not to die immediately. I staggered out of the wreckage and took a look around. The land stretched endlessly in shades of dark green and shimmering silver. Trees with wide, leafless stalks arched toward the sun like dancers, frozen in the middle of a bow. Gravity was Earth-like, the air breathable, if a bit spiced with something that made my throat tickle. Maybe oregano, or poison. Within an hour of limping away from the wreck, I was found. Or more accurately, surrounded. They moved like liquid metal, these figures. Humanoid, tall, elegant, and armored head to toe in dark obsidian plating that pulsed faintly with indigo circuitry. Their skin, where visible, was pale with an opalescent sheen, and they had long, upward-sloping ears like antennae that had decided fashion mattered more than physics. I held up both hands. Hi. Greetings. I come in peace. Technically, I came in pieces, but you get the idea. They didn't laugh, which was fair. Maybe humor didn't translate, or maybe their armor didn't come with a giggle setting. Before I could try a second round of terrible diplomacy, they seized me and bound my wrists with something that looked suspiciously like glowing vines and hummed ominously. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. I noticed a flowing insignia etched into her chest plate, 6 sharp lines intersecting a single vertical slash. You are in violation of Interstellar Border Code Section 1182C, she said. Her voice filtered through some kind of translator that gave her the gravitas of a vengeful opera singer. I'd argue I'm in violation of bad luck, really, I said, trying for a grin. She blinked once, a slow, predatory blink. Then she turned and marched off. The others followed, with me in tow. The palace, if you could call it that, rose from the ground like a shard of the moon itself, had broken free and embedded into the soil. Smooth stone, sharp angles, and shimmering light panels embedded between the seams. It looked like it was grown rather than built, or summoned. They brought me through corridors flanked by guards who seemed to whisper just by looking at me. At last, I was led into a vast chamber lit by floating spheres that pulsed with gentle orange light. Rows of armored figures lined the sides in precise, unnerving symmetry. And on the raised platform at the far end stood her, Queen Solenia Vel Sarin. I don't know what I expected. Fangs, tentacles, a 10-foot mantis in a ball gown. She looked almost human, almost. A humanoid woman with long golden hair braided like woven sunlight, skin pale as starlight, and eyes the color of glaciers caught mid-thaw. Her ears rose elegantly, flaring slightly at the tips, and her armor was not only ceremonial but radiant, deep blue plates etched with silver vinework, glowing softly. She regarded me with the expression of someone trying to decide whether a new food was edible or a prank. "This is the one who fell from the sky?" she asked, her voice calm and musical, like a threat hidden in a lullaby. I also respond to handsome, lost, or engineer, I said, or just Aaron, really. One name, like Cher. There was a long silence. One of the guards flinched. I wondered if sarcasm was a punishable offense here. But Solenia didn't strike me down. She stepped closer instead, eyes narrowing. "You do not fear death?" I exhaled slowly. "Lady, I flew a third-generation cargo freighter through a Class D wormhole, fueled by half a tank of ion dregs and blind optimism. Death and I have brunch on Tuesdays." A sound escaped her, brief, sharp, a laugh or a cough. Hard to say, but her lips twitched in what might have been the kingdom's first recorded smirk in a century. Still, tradition demanded a sentence. She turned to her advisors and began speaking in her native tongue, sharp and flowing like wind through metal trees. I stood very still, which is the universal behavior of people who suspect something might explode soon. And then, I don't know what possessed me, I fished into the side pouch of my belt, pulled out the thing I'd been whittling from my crash wreckage. A tiny animal, vaguely resembling a furry beetle with big eyes. Probably Veltarine's equivalent of a pug. I stepped forward, palms open, and offered it. "This is for you." The entire chamber seemed to suck in its breath. Solenia looked at the carving, then at me, then back at the carving. Slowly she reached out. Her fingers brushed mine. She took it as if it were made of crystal and secrets. Her face changed, subtly, a soft widening of the eyes, a quiet breath drawn in. Then very quietly she said, "What is its purpose?" "It's just a gift," I replied, suddenly self-conscious. "Something small. I thought maybe, I don't know, you'd like it." Another pause, a longer one. She turned the object in her hand, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me. "I do not understand." But her voice had changed. No longer iron. Now it was uncertain. And in that moment, as 100 armored aliens watched their queen stare at a palm-sized carving from a human idiot who crash-landed in their royal garden, I realized I might have accidentally done something very important, or very stupid, probably both. I expected many things after handing a carved beetle thing to the queen of a race I had just met. Public execution, perhaps. Galactic-level cultural offense. Maybe even a politely worded restraining order scratched into stone with ceremonial plasma. What I did not expect was to be escorted, not dragged, not kicked, into a chamber that looked like a cross between a spa, a museum, and a weapons vault. "You are permitted to dwell here," said the guard, who hadn't blinked once since we left the throne room. "This chamber is fitted with environmental adjusters, a sustenance synthesizer calibrated to your biology, and a cleansing basin." "I hope that's not a polite way of saying alien hose down," I muttered. He ignored me. "And what about the ropes?" I asked, raising my wrists, still glowing faintly with vine-like restraints. "They stay." Of course they did. He left me alone finally, and the doors shut with an expensive-sounding shh, the universal sign that someone was about to be either pampered or imprisoned. I explored my cell. My guest chamber. It wasn't bad. There was a curved window displaying the bioluminescent gardens outside, a hovering sleep platform, and a strange floating orb in the corner that blinked when I waved at it. It beeped, projected a small holographic fire, and said, "Mood, cozy." Cozy, sure. Just me and 1,000 invisible cameras. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Queen Selenia, the way her eyes lingered on the gift, the soft, puzzled breath she'd taken, like I just handed her a kitten made of quantum equations. Maybe no one ever gave her something that wasn't part of a treaty, a war, or an arranged betrothal. Or maybe she was just allergic to wood. By day 3, I'd learned 2 things. First, Veltarine breakfast involved a kind of glowing moss paste that tasted like someone had pureed moonlight with regret. Second, I had become palace gossip. Guards stared. Servants whispered. Even the maintenance drones beeped at me suspiciously. One even chased me for 10 meters before short-circuiting itself against a doorframe. My only ally was a short, rectangular unit with a paintbrush attachment that cleaned the floor while muttering in a mechanical voice, "Ugh, dust. Again." I blame the human. At least it had personality. Selenia visited on the 4th day. She entered without warning, flanked by 2 guards who stayed at the threshold like they were afraid of catching feelings. She wore simpler armor now, still ceremonial but less queen, more thoughtful warrior monk. Her hair was down, the golden strands catching the light in ways that felt unfair to anyone who hadn't brushed theirs since the crash. "You still live," she said. "Organized chaos," Elias corrected proudly. "It's a strategic advantage. Confuses the enemy. And yourselves, it seems. Minor side effect." They passed a fountain where a diplomat from the aquatic world of Meravos was dramatically splashing water at a dry-skinned Terran ambassador. A cleaning drone hovered nearby, chirping in distress. Somewhere in the distance, a tiny explosion rattled a food court. Lisseri watched it all with a kind of serene fascination. "How," she said softly, "have you people survived this long?" Elias grinned. "Sheer stubbornness and a lot of luck. Mostly stubbornness." As they neared the council hall, a towering structure that looked suspiciously like an upended pineapple, Elias felt the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. Whatever lay ahead wasn't going to be easy. Old ghosts stirred in the polished walls. Politics, betrayal, hope, and fear, all braided together like the storm clouds over Vexir 4. And through it all, Lissari walked at his side, her long ears flickering slightly at every new sound, her violet eyes steady. He didn't know exactly what they were walking into. He just knew he'd rather face it with her than alone. The council hall smelled like a fruit market had exploded, and nobody had cleaned it properly. Aromas from a dozen worlds mingled in the cavernous room. Spicy, siltery incense, the bitter tang of Orvian nectar fumes, and, most offensively, the oily stench of Terran cafeteria coffee. Elias wrinkled his nose and tugged at his collar, feeling the judging gazes of 100 diplomats pinning him in place like a butterfly on display. At the heart of the hall, a circular dais rose, floating slightly above the polished floor, thanks to anti-grav projectors that hummed with the tired sigh of overworked technology. Around it, rows of delegates, ambassadors, and self-important minor royalty perched like crows ready to caw at the slightest misstep. In the center stood Lissari, no crown, no throne, just a tall, white-skinned woman with long black hair braided in intricate loops and long, elegantly curved ears peeking through. She stood there in simple armor, her presence quiet but unyielding, like the calm at the eye of a hurricane. Elias shifted from foot to foot beside her, feeling about as useful as a screen door on a starfighter. An elderly counselor, a Benthari with wrinkled turquoise skin and eyes like polished stones, cleared his throat and spoke into the room's amplifiers. Queen Lissari of Velgzar, you stand accused of harboring fugitives, violating neutral zone accords, and aiding insurgents against the Confederacy. How do you plead? Elias sucked in a breath. He had seen courtroom dramas before. He even starred in one once when he forgot to pay for a sandwich back on Mars Station. This, however, was shaping up to be a whole different level of disaster. Lissari tilted her head, a subtle gesture of calculation. I plead, she said, that your accusations are as well-founded as a skiff built of mist. The room erupted into angry murmurs, translation devices scrambling to catch up. Elias leaned in and whispered, that was a fancy way of saying, you're full of it, right? She nodded once. The counselor's mouth worked silently for a moment before he recovered. Do you deny aiding the rebel factions on Vexir 4? I offered sanctuary to survivors of the orbital bombardment, she replied evenly. Children, civilians, I would do so again. A sharp whisper of outrage swept the assembly. Somewhere near the back, an Elendari warlord made a strangled sound like he'd swallowed his ceremonial dagger. Elias, sensing that subtlety was not about to win the day, cleared his throat and stepped forward, ignoring Lissari's glance of mild alarm. If I may, he said, flashing what he hoped was a disarming smile, there seems to be a bit of confusion here. Standard, really. Paperwork gets lost, communications get scrambled. I'm pretty sure someone thinks I'm still dead, according to the latest Confederacy census. A ripple of reluctant laughter spread through the hall. And speaking of confusion, Elias continued, emboldened, let's not forget who ordered the Vexir 4 bombardment in the first place. Not Queen Lissari. She was too busy saving what was left of the colony. Me included, I might add. A debt I'm proud to repay. He caught Lissari's eye. She looked at him with an unreadable expression, but there was a flicker of warmth there too. The Benthari counselor narrowed his eyes. And why should we believe you, Sergeant Vance? A soldier with a record of disciplinary creativity? And so it was that I, Aaron Mace, crash-landed on a planet, gave a queen a dumb little wooden bug, and ended up rewriting a 1,000-year-old law, disrupting a galactic tribunal, and accidentally getting married. All because I wanted to make someone smile. So the next time someone tells you that small things don't matter, tell them about the bug and the queen who kept it. The stars were supposed to be beautiful. That's what the recruitment vids promised. See the stars, they said, with smiling officers and drone shots of shimmering nebulae. Serve humanity, protect peace, explore the galaxy. Nobody mentioned the blood, or the smell, or the way stars looked when they were reflected off the burning hull of a downed-assault craft that had once been your ride home. Private Kieran Holt was too busy trying not to bleed out to enjoy the view. He lay awkwardly slumped in a shallow crater, one leg twisted under him like a crumpled antenna. His armor, state-of-the-art 6 years ago and now mostly duct tape and good intentions, was cracked open along the chest. Sparks hissed out with each dying pulse of his life support system. A cheerful automated voice repeating, "Biosigns critical. Have a nice death." "Kiss my biosign," he muttered, spitting dust and blood. Above, the sky flickered with residual plasma from the battle. Orbit was quiet now. Too quiet. Which probably meant the enemy either thought he was dead or didn't care enough to confirm. He preferred the first option. It was the more optimistic one. A whiff of smoke curled across the air, acrid and alien. The planet, whatever it was called, he'd forgotten, ended in EUS or era or something poetic, had been a lush green jewel once. Now it was a cratered dump, carpeted with corpses and cooling metal. The Federation fleet had lost. Not honorably, not dramatically. Just lost. Outgunned, out-schemed, and out of luck. Kieran, a logistics runner who could barely shoot straight, had been caught in the middle. Not the heroic middle. The "you're carrying an extra plasma pack for someone else" middle. Something crunched nearby. His good hand reached for the blaster holstered at his hip, only to find it gone, likely jettisoned along with his dignity. He froze. Craters didn't usually make noises, not unless something was in them, or someone. "Just so we're clear," he rasped to no one in particular, "if you're here to finish me off, I'm gonna need a minute to look cool. Give me like 10 seconds to pose dramatically." The silence replied with the courtesy of a well-funded funeral. Then she appeared. From the drifting smoke came a figure, tall and ghost-like, wearing armor that shimmered with opalescent hues too fluid to be metal, too hard to be fabric. Her stride was slow, deliberate, graceful in that way ballet dancers or big cats tend to move when they know exactly how dangerous they are. She was humanoid, mostly, but not Federation. Not even from the concordant species list. Too pale, almost luminous. Hair long, black, flowing behind her like liquid void. And ears, gods, the ears, long and arched backward like twin blades sculpted from ivory. Kieran blinked. "Okay, this is either a hallucination or the war's gotten way sexier since I passed out." She didn't answer. Just crouched beside him, her eyes scanning his face like a biometric lock searching for access. They were red, not glowing exactly, but vibrant, alive, like smoldering embers in a dying fire. "You're human," she said, the words wrapped in an accent he couldn't place. Half melody, half threat. "Last I checked," he grunted, "unless I've suddenly become an exotic species in the afterlife, in which case 10 out of 10, love the ambiance." Her expression didn't change, though one of her ears twitched. It might have been amusement or irritation, hard to tell. "You're dying," she said matter-of-factly. "Yeah, I noticed. Got any gum?" She regarded him with the kind of patience one might show a raccoon trying to solve a math equation. Then she reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a small obsidian vial. It was unmarked, unmistakably ominous. "This can heal you. Is that a drink, or am I about to be poisoned with interstellar essential oils?" "It's my blood." He blinked again. "Oh, cool. You're one of those types. Look, I'm flattered, really, but I usually buy a girl dinner before I—" "It will make you whole again," she interrupted, voice flat. "It will also change you." "Into what? Someone who enjoys unsolicited blood donations?" She didn't smile, but this time she did roll her eyes. A small victory. "I am Sereth," she said, placing the vial gently on the dusty ground beside him. "Of the Velari. Last of my kind. What I offer is not pity, it is legacy." Kieran stared at the vial. It didn't look like much. Thick, dark, swirling faintly, like there were stars caught inside. Probably wasn't FDA approved. "So, drink this, I get better. What's the catch? You will stop aging, you will stop dying. Your wounds will fade, but so will your ability to live as you once did. I'll be immortal?" In a manner of speaking. He considered. He had maybe 5 minutes of life left. Maybe 2. The pain was sharp, like his bones were trying to escape. Every breath tasted like copper and static. You offering this to everyone, or am I just that charming? You are the only one left, she said, standing. Oh, good, he muttered. No pressure, then. She began to walk away, her boots whispering over the ash. Wait, he shouted after her. What happens if I drink it and don't want to be immortal? Is there a return policy? There is only forward, she called back without turning. He stared at the vial, then at the sky, then back at the gaping hole in his leg. Forward it is. The taste was strange. Metallic, yes, but also electric, like 1,000 thoughts flashing through a cable too thin to hold them. His veins lit up like circuit boards. His vision warped, colors bent, sound slowed. For a moment he felt like the universe had inhaled, and he was caught in its breath. Then he screamed. It was not a man's scream, not a soldier's. It was something raw, primal, ancient, and oddly musical. His body spasmed. Bones shifted. Wounds stitched themselves together like time reversing. Nerves danced and sparked. And then it stopped. He was whole. Not just healed, better, stronger, lighter. Side effects may include ego inflation and an existential crisis, he mumbled, sitting up with trembling arms. Sareth was gone, vanished into the smoke, or the stars. He laughed, short and incredulous. Well, guess I'm immortal now. He looked down at his armor, at the smoldering battlefield around him. Still not going to pay back my student loans, though. Then he stood slowly, for the first time as something more than human. The war might have ended, but his story had just begun. Kieran Holt had been alive for approximately 6 hours since his unexpected rebirth, and already he was beginning to suspect that immortality was grossly oversold. He stood inside what remained of an abandoned war transport shuttle, probably Violates in design, judging by the elegant curvature of its bulkheads and the complete absence of chairs designed for human posteriors. Outside, the air still shimmered with residual heat from orbital bombardments, casting a sickly gold hue through the cracked viewport. Inside, the ceiling dripped with condensation that smelled faintly like fried circuitry and regret. His leg was fully healed. So was the hole in his side. But now he was left with a more pressing concern. Hunger. Not just regular hunger. Not space MREs are gross, but I'll live hunger. This was something deeper, like his stomach had been replaced with a black hole, and every part of him was being slowly devoured from the inside out. Okay, he muttered, pacing the metal floor. Cool. Just a minor side effect. Healing factor, a plus. Energy reserves, F-. Maybe I just need a protein bar or 30. A scavenged survival pack sat open nearby, its contents sadly devoid of anything resembling food. Just a half-melted flashlight, an auto patch that hissed ominously when shaken, and a travel-sized toothbrush that had clearly never been used by any living soul. He groaned. This is how the immortals die. Starvation in an alien shuttle, surrounded by useless junk and suspiciously minty dental hygiene products. Then, as if summoned by sarcasm, the comm panel on the shuttle's dashboard crackled. Kieran froze, hand drifting toward a piece of broken piping that, if squinted at hard enough, could be a weapon. The speaker buzzed again, then cleared. Repeating, "This is Captain Aldine Varys of the Wayfarer's Thorn, scanning for survivors. If you're not a meat wolf or one of those screeching biomechs, kindly ping back so we don't blast your face off by accident." Kieran fumbled to the controls, slapping random buttons until something chirped cheerfully and the mic engaged. "This is, Private Kieran Holt, human, technically still alive. Also technically not completely human anymore? Long story. Anyway, please don't blast my face off." There was a pause, then a snort. "Well, you don't sound like a screeching biomech, and you're definitely too polite to be a meat wolf. Coordinates locked. Sit tight." The transmission ended. Kieran stared at the comm, then at the ceiling. "Okay," he whispered. "This day has officially become weird enough that I'm grateful for sarcastic strangers. I'm running them." The Wayfarer's Thorn was exactly what its name suggested. A starship that looked like it had picked a fight with an asteroid belt and won only by cheating. Its hull was pockmarked with weld scars and mismatched armor plating, as if someone had angrily assembled it using parts from 3 different scrapyards. It smelled like old socks and engine coolant, which to Kieran's nose was almost nostalgic. The crew, however, was unexpected. Captain Aldine Varys was a wiry woman with one mechanical eye that blinked independently of the other and a demeanor that suggested caffeine was her only religion. She met him in the cargo hold with a raised eyebrow and a blaster slung casually across her hip. "You don't look undead," she said. "Thanks, I moisturize." Her second-in-command was a stoic, four-armed alien named Vexel, who looked like a cross between a beetle and a disgruntled librarian. The ship's medic, a lanky synthetic with a broken personality core named Doc 7, attempted to scan Kieran and promptly fainted, digitally, when his readings returned biologically impossible. "You're wrong," Doc 7 stammered when rebooted. "Your cellular regeneration is looping. You have no degradation markers. Your blood is not red. Also, I think you might be radioactive." "That would explain why I feel like a microwave burrito," Kieran said. Sareth was already aboard. She'd arrived ahead of him somehow, likely through some silent teleporting alien trick she hadn't thought to share. She stood in a corner of the medbay, arms crossed, unreadable as always. Her armor gleamed faintly in the overhead lights. Her eyes watched him without blinking. "You survived," she said. "Barely," he replied. "Next time, can we pick a transformation method that doesn't involve internal screaming and me seeing all of time at once?" Her head tilted. It was efficient. You know what else is efficient? Naps Kieran was escorted to a small cabin that smelled like it had been previously occupied by either a small lizard or a large fungus. He collapsed onto the bunk and stared at the ceiling for a long while, listening to the hum of the engines. It should have been peaceful, but his body itched in ways that weren't physical. Like something inside him was adjusting, testing the boundaries of its new host. And then there was the hunger again. When he finally found something edible, a nutrient paste labeled Flavor Beige, it helped, but not much. It tasted like guilt and drywall. He nearly wept. Later that night, he wandered into the mess hall and found Sareth standing by the viewport, watching a nebula pass in violet silence. She didn't turn when he entered. "Is this what it's like for you?" he asked, sitting nearby. "This not quite hunger, the buzzing in your head, the weird way time feels like it's folding in on itself?" "Yes," she said. "Fun. It becomes manageable. In time. Immortal time or normal time?" She glanced at him, ears twitching slightly. "You're adapting quickly." "Is that a compliment?" "Number, it's concerning." He grinned despite himself. "You're terrible at reassurance, you know that?" "I wasn't trying to reassure you." There was a pause. Then she said, "You will need to feed properly. Soon." "I was afraid you were going to say that. Is this going to involve me biting someone dramatically? Because I left my cape back on the battlefield." Sareth didn't laugh, but she did smile. Barely, a flicker, like a shooting star in a dead sky. "Blood packs," she said. "Synthesized. The ship carries some. It will suffice for now." He nodded, then leaned back and stared at the nebula. "So what now? We running from something? Hunted by dark forces? Galactic conspiracies? Shadow empires?" "Yes." "Oh, great, I was joking." "I wasn't," Kieran sighed. "Can I at least pick a cool code name?" "You're a soldier." "Was a soldier," she considered. "Then you are reborn," he snorted. "Cool. I'll put that on my space resume. Kieran Holt, former logistics grunt, current immortal abomination, occasional comedian." Sareth turned back to the stars. Behind them, the Wayfarer's Thorn slid deeper into the void, towards secrets older than maps and enemies too old to forget. Kieran's new life had begun, and he had the uneasy feeling that death had not let him go. Only stepped aside to watch what happened next. The galaxy had a smell. Not a poetic smell, not the imagined perfume of stardust or solar winds, but something real, pungent, impossible to scrub out of your uniform. To Kieran Holt, immortality smelled like recycled air, engine grease, and the faint trace of dried blood from species he couldn't even pronounce. It was, in a way, comforting, like sweat after a long run, like the scent of a long battle nearly done. The wayfarer's thorn coasted quietly in the outer rim of the Gorgon Verge, that charmingly named stretch of dead space where old weapons went to rust and forgotten empires kept their secrets. Below, on the gray-brown crust of a long, abandoned moon base, something stirred, a thing not meant to wake, and definitely not meant to evolve. Kieran checked the charge on his rifle, a modified plasma carbine affectionately named Mild Disagreement, and adjusted the straps on his armor. The new gear fit differently, tighter, like it knew what he was now, like it was trying to behave. "You're unusually quiet," came a voice behind him. Sareth stood, tall and shadow-smooth, her black hair pulled back in a warrior's knot. Her ears twitched with radar-like precision as she scanned the horizon. Even when she wasn't trying to be intimidating, she radiated the kind of energy that said, "I've killed people with fewer bones than you." "I'm brooding," Kieran said. "It's part of the immortality package. Gotta practice looking stoic and emotionally damaged. Very space vampire chic." "You're not a vampire." "Tell that to the blood packs I've been snacking on for 2 weeks. They're nutrient-enriched plasma supplements." He grinned. "Still tastes like evil tomato juice." Sareth sighed. That sound alone had more depth than most novels. They were here for the signal. It had started as a whisper, intermittent pulses buried beneath pirate traffic, old war codes, and an alarming number of interstellar dating service ads. Doc 7, their perpetually anxious synthetic medic, had finally cracked the encryption. The source? A Valari distress beacon, broadcasting from a facility that predated the current calendar system, which meant one of two things, a trap or something worse. "Ready?" Sareth asked. Kieran adjusted his rifle again. "As I'll ever be, and if I die again, I'd like my tombstone to read, 'Came back once, didn't learn.'" "Noted." They descended together, boots crunching over old ferrocrete and shattered glass. The base was silent, haunted by dust and memory. Rusted control panels blinked with dying power, still waiting for commands no one would give. Deep below, a hum, soft and wet, echoed through the dark. They found it in the central chamber. Not a person, not exactly. The last Valari, or rather what remained of one, bound to an enormous arcane biotech core, fused into it like muscle threaded through glass. Its voice came through the room like wind through cracked speakers. "Sareth, daughter of the line, you returned too late." The being was ancient, its form flickering between matter and data. Its mind, shattered by centuries of isolation, had only one thing left, a failsafe. It had called out for others, and in doing so, it had awoken something else. A weapon, it said, meant to protect, now corrupted. The blood is no longer pure. Kieran frowned. "Are we talking about a literal weapon, or, like, one of those metaphysical threats that require a lot of dramatic speeches?" Sareth was silent, but her eyes darkened. "The gift I gave you," she said softly, "was not without risk. If the bloodline stored here has decayed, it may not heal, only consume." And consume it had. Behind the core, the wall trembled, then split. Out came the creature, tall as two men, built from bone and synthetic sinew. Its flesh shimmered with the same darkness that danced in Kieran's veins. But its eyes were empty, not the burning embers of the Vailari, but the cold, ravenous hunger of something that wanted to unmake everything, including itself. Kieran raised his rifle. "Okay, no problem. We'll just negotiate with the space golem that's clearly made from bad decisions and worse fashion choices." It charged. The battle was chaos wrapped in plasma fire and teeth. Sareth moved like liquid steel, slicing with twin energy blades, her strikes almost musical. Kieran fought alongside her, immortal body adapting on the fly, learning, shifting, healing even as the thing threw him across the room like a particularly annoying paperweight. "You're enjoying this," she shouted over the noise. "A little," he admitted, ducking a claw, "but I'm mostly terrified." The creature was strong, but it wasn't stable. Every strike it took sent flickers through its frame, like bad code trying to recompile. Kieran realized something then. "It's incomplete," he yelled. It's copying Valari code, but it's wrong, like it's missing a piece. Sareth's eyes widened. You! They turned to the core, to the remnants of the true Valari essence pulsing within. If Kieran's blood was the new vessel, the weapon needed a tether, a final lineage anchor. Wait, he said, panting. Are we suggesting I merge with a biofurnace haunted by a dead alien consciousness to overwrite a nightmare clone with my own personality? Yes, Sareth said. He blinked. That's surprisingly on brand. With one last breath, out of habit more than need, Kieran stepped into the heart of the storm. The core opened to him, not violently, but like an embrace. Data rushed into him, images of ancient Violari cities, songs sung through blood and time, names whispered by stars themselves. And then the weapon paused, recognized him. It howled, and then fell silent. When he woke, the base was quiet again. Sareth stood over him, her expression unreadable. It's done, he croaked. She nodded. You anchored it. The corruption has ended. Cool, he muttered. Let's never do that again. Weeks later, aboard the Wayfarer's Thorn, Kieran sat in the mess hall, sipping what might generously be called coffee. The galaxy hadn't changed. Still chaotic. Still stupid. Still full of bureaucrats trying to charge him taxes on 3 different star systems. But he wasn't just immortal now. He belonged to something older. He carried the Valari legacy, not as a curse, but as a torch. And he wasn't alone. Sareth entered the room, pausing only to toss a datapad onto the table. Distress signal. Near Author Ridge. Sounds like pirates. Kieran stretched. Pirates, huh? Time to try out my new grizzled immortal bounty hunter persona? She smirked. You're still not grizzled. Give it a few centuries. They walked together to the bridge, their shadows long, their journey only just beginning. And in the silence between stars, the galaxy exhaled. For now. In the uncharted spaces between the civilized worlds and the wild zones of the Orion sector, rumors traveled faster than light and with considerably less respect for the truth. They spoke of a woman, no, a creature perhaps, no one was entirely sure, who could bring admirals to their knees with a smile and dissolve diplomatic pacts with a flick of her wrist. Her name was Velria, and if half the stories were true, she could charm the rust off a starship and make it apologize for being dirty. Cal Trenwith didn't believe in rumors, mostly because he had been raised on a mining colony where the most exciting thing that ever happened was the time someone found a potato shaped like a famous pop star. His upbringing had made him practical, suspicious, and deeply allergic to glamour, which was precisely why he had been chosen for this mission. Earth Command needed someone unaffected, level-headed, and, if possible, too dense to notice when the universe batted its long, fluttering eyelashes. It was a plan with all the brilliance of sending a moth to guard a flamethrower. The ship that ferried Cal to Seraphine 5 was called the Inadvisable Venture, a name that filled him with confidence. Piloted by a half-defunct android named Arlo 9, who had, at various points during the journey, tried to sell him timeshares on a death moon and confessed to harboring deep resentment toward his own toaster. Cal arrived in the orbit of Seraphine 5 slightly ahead of schedule and slightly behind on sanity. Seraphine 5 was a gas giant so massive it wore its moons like jewelry, thick coils of atmospheric ribbons swirling in colors too vivid to be natural. Suspended in the upper layers of this colossal beauty was Velria's floating court, a palace made of mirrored spires and gravity-defying terraces, tethered to stability by technology older than humanity's collective bad decisions. Arlo 9 buzzed irritably as Cal adjusted his armor in the cramped airlock. Recommendation: abandon hope, Arlo said, his voice cheerful in the way that only machines who had accepted inevitable doom could be. Secondary recommendation: bring flowers. Cal checked his reflection in the shiny surface of the airlock door. His uniform was clean, his boots were polished, and his expression was set somewhere between grim determination and mild gastrointestinal discomfort. Good enough. He took a deep breath, which he immediately regretted because the recycled air smelled like someone had microwaved old gym socks. The shuttle docked with a gentle thunk, and the door slid open with a theatrical hiss, revealing the entryway to Velria's domain. It was like stepping into a dream, or a particularly elaborate trap designed by someone who read too many romance novels. The air was thick with an intoxicating, almost tangible scent that defied categorization. It wasn't quite floral, wasn't quite spicy, but it clung to the senses like a warm memory of something half forgotten. The grand hall rose before him, its walls a shifting landscape of metal and light, refracting the gas giant's swirling colors through translucent panels. There were beings of every description lounging in alcoves, talking, laughing, and occasionally engaging in what looked suspiciously like interpretive dance battles. And at the far end, framed by a dais that floated inches above the ground, sat Velria. Cal had seen pictures, of course, intelligence briefings that tried to describe her with the dry detachment of government employees utterly unprepared for this kind of problem. Subject is humanoid, pale skin tone, black hair, ears elongated beyond human norm, attire non-standardized, minimal protective gear, demeanor classified as disarming. None of that prepared him for the real thing. Velria was beautiful in a way that didn't feel entirely legal. Her skin was the color of distant stars, her hair spilled down her back like liquid night, and her long, slender ears gave her an almost elfin grace that set her apart even from the bizarre collection of aliens gathered around her. She wore a flowing tunic of shimmering material that refused to settle on any one color for more than a few seconds. Her gaze was sharp, curious, and just a little bit amused, as though she already knew every mistake he was about to make and was looking forward to them. He swallowed hard and stepped forward, his boots making a noise that was somehow both too loud and too embarrassing. Half the room turned to stare. Someone giggled. Somewhere, a tiny trumpet tooted a whump-whump sound. Cal snapped into a salute. Cal Trenwith, Earth Diplomatic Corps, assigned to, His mind blanked. Words fled like rodents from a sinking ship. Velria tilted her head, her long ears twitching slightly. Assigned to, she prompted, her voice rich and musical, with an undertone that suggested she found this immensely entertaining. To conduct an investigation, Cal blurted, his voice cracking on the last word. Standard procedure. Very standard. Nothing unusual about it. Very boring, actually. Incredibly dull. She smiled, and Cal felt his soul attempt to crawl out of his body and declare diplomatic immunity. An investigation? Velria repeated, leaning forward slightly. Oh, how exciting. Shall we begin with a full-body search? The crowd roared with laughter. Cal turned so red he was fairly sure he was violating several interstellar treaties on radiation emissions. Velria rose from her seat in one graceful motion, the folds of her garment shimmering into something that looked suspiciously like battle armor and evening wear at the same time. She approached him, every step measured, hypnotic, impossible to ignore. Cal forced himself to hold his ground. Somewhere deep inside, his survival instincts were scribbling frantic warnings on the walls of his mind. When she stood directly before him, Velria's scent enveloped him fully, a heady, swirling cocktail that made rational thought feel like trying to do calculus while skydiving. You are very brave, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Or very foolish. I have not yet decided which. Cal opened his mouth to reply. Nothing came out but a faint wheeze like a dying air compressor. Come, Velria said, linking her arm through his. You must tell me all about your mission. Over drinks, naturally, and perhaps a small dance duel. A dance duel, Cal repeated weakly as she steered him away. It's very traditional, she assured him with a dazzling smile. You'll love it. Or at least you'll survive it. Probably. As she led him deeper into her court, Cal knew one thing for certain. He was spectacularly, catastrophically out of his depth. And somewhere behind the haze of pheromones, humor, and overwhelming charm, a tiny voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he didn't mind at all. After all, how often did you get invited to a dance duel by the most dangerous woman in the galaxy, especially when she smelled this good? The Hall of the Endless Waltz, as Velria's followers affectionately called it, was neither endless nor particularly good for waltzing. It was a sprawling dome of semi-transparent crystal that floated serenely above the rest of the court, anchored only by faith, gravity stabilizers, and what Cal strongly suspected was a large quantity of wishful thinking. Light from the swirling atmosphere of Seraphine 5 danced across the walls, giving everything an unearthly, shimmering glow. It was, Cal thought, exactly the sort of place where someone like him could humiliate himself with maximum audience participation. Velria led him through the throngs of beings who, by the look of it, had been drinking steadily since before he was born. There were creatures with more limbs than fashion sense, towering beings made of vapor, and small, cube-shaped diplomats who occasionally beeped indignantly when stepped on. The music that filled the chamber was a strange blend of alien instruments, throbbing bass lines, crystalline chimes, and something that sounded suspiciously like a drunken accordion fighting for its life. "I should warn you," Valeria said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Dance duels here are not exactly traditional." Cal, trying not to trip over his own feet, nodded solemnly. "Great, good. I'm excellent at making a fool of myself in public. It's practically a core skill." She laughed, a sound so melodic that the two nearest waiters paused mid-tray spin just to bask in it. At the center of the hall was the arena, a circular platform slightly raised above the floor and bathed in a soft violet light. Around it, the crowd gathered eagerly, scenting blood, or at least the chance for a spectacular pratfall. "Rules are simple," Velria said as she escorted him onto the platform. "You dance. I dance. The crowd judges. If you lose, you owe me a favor. If I lose—" She smiled sweetly. "Well, that never happens." "No pressure, then," Cal muttered. Before he could back out or fake a sudden allergic reaction to atmospheric gases, the music shifted. A heavy beat dropped, something tribal and chaotic that made his spine want to move against his better judgment. Velria moved first, gliding onto the floor with the effortless grace of someone who had either studied dance at a molecular level or had personally evolved just to look good doing it. Cal's turn came. He took a deep breath, cracked his knuckles, and committed fully to the first rule of embarrassing yourself. If you're going to be ridiculous, own it. Launching into a strange hybrid of ancient earth breakdancing, panicked improvisation, and what could generously be described as aggressive enthusiasm, Cal threw himself into the beat. His limbs flailed with abandon. His boots squeaked alarmingly. At one point, he attempted a spin, overbalanced, and executed a move that could only be called the helpless, flailing comet. The crowd loved it. Beings of all shapes and sensory mechanisms howled with delight. Someone threw what looked like a golden squid into the air in celebration. Velria, for her part, laughed so hard she nearly lost her balance, which for her was probably equivalent to a full-blown collapse. Cal finally staggered to a halt, chest heaving, arms akimbo, hair sticking up in directions that defied the laws of physics. He saluted the crowd shakily. The judges, a panel of 3 sentient holograms and 1 enthusiastic houseplant, conferred briefly. Then, with much fanfare, they declared Cal the winner. Velria clapped her hands, genuinely delighted. "Astonishing! I haven't seen moves like that since the Drellin ambassador tried to escape an anti-gravity malfunction." Cal tried to catch his breath. "Thank you. I pride myself on my complete lack of shame." As tradition demanded, Velria offered him a prize, a single golden token, embossed with an unfamiliar sigil. It shimmered with its own inner light, radiating a soft, pleasant hum. "Hold on to that," she said. "It will grant you a favor at a time of your choosing. Anything you wish." Cal eyed the token suspiciously. "Anything?" She nodded, her long ears twitching with amusement. "Within reason, of course. No asking for my planetary dominion. It gets awkward." He slipped the token into his belt pouch. "I was thinking more along the lines of a sandwich." "Practical," she said approvingly. "I admire that." As the festivities continued, Velria ushered him toward a quieter alcove where the noise was muffled and the lighting softer, though still thoroughly impractical for reading small print. "You're not what I expected," she said, reclining on a levitating divan that suspiciously adjusted itself to flatter her posture at every angle. "Earth usually sends men with more moral rigidity and fewer dance moves. Cal shrugged. I'm the cheap option. They spent the real money on prettier agents. Velria laughed again. Perhaps that is why you intrigue me, Tiny Helmet. He flushed. Is that my new code name? It suits you, she said. Besides, it is better than the alternatives. Earth Stick Man lacks poetry. The conversation meandered, picking up strange and fascinating threads. Velria spoke of the politics of the gas giant alliances, the ongoing rivalry between the Crab Nebula Guilds and the Onion Ring Confederacy. Both names, she assured him, were absolutely serious. And the minor scandal caused when a minor duke accidentally married his own diplomatic AI. Throughout it all, Cal found himself relaxing, lulled by her humor, her wit, and the shimmering chemical magic of her presence. Yet some small, stubborn part of him remained wary. She was too perfect, too practiced. At one point, as she poured him another glass of glowing blue liquid that tasted faintly like peppermint regret, Cal steeled himself. I have to ask, he said, trying for casual and achieving something closer to awkward suspicion. Why the pheromones? Velria smiled lazily. Why do birds sing? Why do humans paint pictures of things they could simply see with their eyes? Because we're idiots, Cal guessed. Because, she said, ignoring him, there is power in art, in beauty, in attraction. War is so wasteful. I offer an alternative. Cal swirled the drink in his glass, watching the tiny stars that somehow floated within it. And if people don't want to follow you? She shrugged, a movement that sent strange, subtle currents through the surrounding air. Then they don't. I am persuasive, not coercive. And the ones who resist? He asked quietly. Velria's gaze sharpened just a fraction. There are always those who believe brute force is the answer to every question. I simply provide better answers. Cal thought of Earth Command, of their orders, cold and precise, of the briefing that had not so subtly hinted that if persuasion failed, he was expected to sabotage her operations, preferably before he ended up proposing marriage on a live interstellar broadcast. He downed the rest of his drink. Well, he said, forcing a grin, for the record, I think you're doing a fantastic job. 10 out of 10 would lose free will again. Velria laughed and the moment of tension evaporated. For now. Somewhere deep in the glowing, swirling heart of Seraphine 5, a storm was gathering, and Cal Trenwith, reluctant diplomat, reluctant saboteur, and even more reluctant dancer, was right at its center. The storm hit not with a roar, but with a whisper, the kind of whisper that made the hair on the back of Cal's neck stand on end and convinced small, sensible animals to burrow deeper into their hiding places. It began with the light, which dimmed unnaturally in the crystalline dome, and a tremor that ran through the air like a ripple across a pond. Velria was on her feet in an instant, her tunic shifting from playful iridescence to the matte black of tactical wear, her long ears flicking sharply toward the disturbance. Around them, the courtiers of Seraphine 5 froze in various stages of drunken interpretive dance, suddenly sober and very, very alert. From the entrance hall came a clattering, clanking procession of armored figures. Earth Command soldiers, the logo of the Terran Alliance emblazoned across their chests. In the lead was Commander Rourke, a man who had once won an award for most likely to be mistaken for a wall, and whose mustache had been declared a minor sovereign nation by 3 separate planets. Velria of Seraphine 5, Rourke bellowed, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence of a man who had practiced shouting at planets. By the authority of Earth Command, you are hereby ordered to submit to custody for subversion, unlawful influence, and excessive charisma. Cal blinked. Excessive charisma is a charge now. New regulation, Velria murmured, her lips twitching. Passed last month, largely targeting small dogs and large influencers. Rourke's glare shifted to Cal, who realized belatedly that he was still standing beside Velria, still wearing the golden token she had given him, and still smelling faintly of whatever delightful chemical cocktail she naturally emitted. Agent Trenwith, Rourke growled. Step aside. Cal's mind raced. Here was his mission. Expose Velria's influence, assist in her neutralization, and receive a slightly dented medal for services rendered. Easy, clean, bureaucratically satisfying, except it wasn't. Not anymore. In the brief days he had spent in Velria's court, he had seen her wield her power, not like a weapon, but like an artist with a brush. She didn't conquer. She invited. She didn't destroy. She inspired. Sure, there were dangers to her charm. Cal himself had nearly proposed after the third round of glowing drinks, and a surprisingly emotional karaoke rendition of "Love Me Like You Orbit Me." But in a galaxy burning with greed and violence, was persuasion really the enemy? Cal took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and made a decision that would definitely get him court-martialed, exiled, and possibly turned into a cautionary tale for future cadets. He stepped in front of Velria. "No," he said. Rourke's mustache bristled. "No?" Cal nodded. "I respectfully, diplomatically, and with full awareness of how many push-ups you're going to make me do later, decline." There was a long, stunned silence. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a small spherical being dropped a tray of glitter cocktails. "You've been compromised," Rourke said, taking a step forward. "You're under her control." Cal chuckled dryly. "If you mean she's made me laugh, made me think, and made me realize that Earth Command has been operating with the subtlety of a wrecking ball piloted by raccoons, then yes, guilty." The soldiers behind Rourke shifted uncertainly. Orders were orders, but even the best-trained troops knew better than to ignore the smell of a public relations disaster. Velria placed a hand lightly on Cal's shoulder. It was not a possessive gesture, nor a manipulative one, just steady, grounding. "I will surrender," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the chamber, "but only under one condition." Rourke narrowed his eyes. "Name it." "You," Velria said, pointing elegantly, "must beat me in a diplomatic dance duel." There was a beat of stunned silence. Cal fought the urge to break into hysterical laughter. Rourke sputtered. "I am a decorated commander of the Terran Alliance. I do not dance." "It's very traditional," Velria said solemnly, utterly deadpan. "You'll love it, or at least you'll survive it. Probably." The crowd, sensing something truly legendary was about to occur, roared its approval. Even the floating waitstaff arranged themselves into eager viewing formations. Cal leaned over to whisper, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Velria winked. "If he refuses, he loses face. If he accepts, he loses dignity. Either way, we win." And so, under the swirling lights of Seraphine 5, Commander Rourke, resplendent in battle armor, several sizes too large for agile movement, attempted to outdance a woman genetically engineered for seduction and performance. It was a bloodbath. Rourke's moves could best be described as enthusiastic lumbering, interspersed with aggressive hopping. Velria, meanwhile, floated across the stage like a living melody, her every step a masterpiece of rhythm and grace. The judges, now including the cube diplomats, the houseplant, and a vapor being who appointed itself official vibe checker, unanimously ruled in Velria's favor within moments. Rourke staggered off the floor, defeated, gasping, and leaving behind a small puddle of what Cal hoped was sweat and not existential despair. "You win," Rourke grunted, peeling off his helmet. "Terms?" Velria smiled. "Simple. I remain free. In return, I agree to limit my influence to voluntary alliances. No coercion, no manipulation, just persuasion, fair and open. And if we find evidence otherwise," Velria's eyes gleamed, "then you may challenge me to another dance-off." The commander, to his eternal credit, managed not to cry. And so it was that Velria was not arrested, Cal was not court-martialed, well, not immediately, and Seraphine 5 became the first gas giant cultural embassy recognized by both the Terran Alliance and the Onion Ring Confederacy, who were frankly just happy to be included. As for Cal, well, he didn't return to Earth Command, not permanently. Instead, he stayed on Seraphine 5 as Earth's liaison, a job that involved lots of diplomatic receptions, interpretive dance battles, and occasional emergencies involving sentient dessert carts. He also found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A cause worth believing in. A home in a place that smelled faintly of starlight and impossible dreams. And, perhaps most importantly, someone who made him laugh when he most needed it. In time, he and Valeria would build something greater than either of them could have managed alone. A fragile, brilliant thread of connection in a galaxy all too prone to falling apart. And every once in a while, when the gas storms howled outside the crystal dome and the laughter inside rose to meet it, Cal would think back to that first ridiculous dance and smile. Because sometimes saving the galaxy didn't come from a gun or a speech. Sometimes it started with the worst dance moves anyone had ever seen, and a woman whose power was not in how she conquered, but in how she inspired. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.